Good afternoon and welcome into Two-Man Game on ClavesOnline.com. I'm Matthew Roccio. That's Bob Ramsey. If you can see it right there under his name, he is live right now from Chaffetz Arena as we are a few hours away from the Billikens facing off against the Davidson Wildcats. Rammer, how are you doing it on this fine afternoon?
It's game day. I feel great.
There we go. Let's talk a little Billikens game day. Obviously, we're going to have to go in the time machine a little bit, kick it back to the weekend when they had that rough game against Dayton. In Dayton, obviously, a 57-70 loss is never something you want to see. It's never something you really want to talk about either, Rammer. But that's why we get paid the medium-sized bucks. So, looking back at Dayton and St. Louis, obviously, it wasn't a great game in the first half, but it really, they really lose it there in the second half. What was your big takeaway from the game in Dayton?
Oh, well, I think that at Dayton's just better. And obviously the score backs it up. So the question is, why? What do they do better? The Billikens actually defended over the course of the game pretty well. Were there issues here, issues there? Yeah, that comes and goes in any given basketball game. But, you'll hold Dayton at home to 57 points. That's pretty darn good. That's real good, in fact. And so what couldn't you do offensively? Well, you saw how good the game was the first 10 minutes when the Bills were matching shots with them. That was pretty fun. That was pretty exciting. But the inconsistency that we've talked about podcast after podcast, inconsistency of ball movement and player movement continued and reared its ugly head again. I don't think there's any question about it.
Yeah, and I hate just going back to what I kind of referred to as a quagmire on Twitter, but I mean, it's just crazy to me that when this team executes, they have the skills, and the offense, I think, is drawn up in a good way with the talent it has to maximize those guys' talents. And so it's frustrating because, I want there to be something more complicated or something else other than just ball movement and player movement and things like that. But it really is as simple as that. And that's why it's so frustrating in the good moments. I mean, There was a couple, they're a perfect dichotomy for me was the Javonte Perkins 3 early in the second half, where he gets it on the wing, he kicks it out to Yuri, and Yuri gives it right back to him. And because they had the defense off kilter, it opened up Javonte on the second pass back. And then completely on a different one, midway through the second, when the game was not completely yet out of hands, Javon Pickett gets an open drive to the elbow, and at the elbow he pulls up to shoot, and there's 3 flyers on him, and there's a wide open shooter in the corner. And so
I believe that was Sincere Parker, and Earl and I at the time looked at each other and even mentioned on the radio broadcast on KMOX that didn't see the wide open man. And I guess that's why the good ones like Yuri have the vision to not see and understand as a play develops where your teammates are, and as you see the defenders in front of you, where the open man is or is going to be.
Yeah, and it's one of those passes where I don't think it's unreasonable, even in the moment, to see Javon Pickett as a veteran player, as a guard, guard forward, to make that passage. He doesn't have to wrap it around anybody. It's not a crazy distance where he's got to skip it over one player. It's a fairly, not basic, but it's a fairly college, high-level college pass that you should be able to make. And that's why it's so frustrating, because they'll make those passes across streets and they just go cold. And so the skill's there, the talent's there, but it just blanks out. And that's why kind of moving on from just the Dayton game and kind of moving forward to this week, that's why I thought it was interesting for me when I went to practice yesterday, and the practice was such a good spirit. Because I kind of expected after that game, the way it felt, that it was going to be kind of a lull of a day, and we were going to get players and coaches kind of in an off mood. But really, I was impressed by how much the players were in their usual spirits. They're having fun. They're locked in. They're getting stuff done, but they're having fun in the moments between that. And I think, again, this is a team that when they put it together, and if they can put it together over these next 6 games, we get to Brooklyn, it's going to look good and they're going to surprise some people. But again, they're not getting down on themselves. So it gives me confidence that we're going to see a game without those huge lapses. But again, until we see that, I have to continually doubt that we're going to see a full 40 minutes from this SLU basketball team.
Well, history supports your position.
Yeah.
I mean, it just does. And it's something you strive for to get better. I would also say that without the other details that you put in, of the 300, what is it, 63 Division I teams this year, something like that? How many coaches right now would tell you, if we could play a full 40-minute game, ...
Yeah.
300, it's just that's what everybody strives for. And this team is not there yet, but there seem to be some indications they're getting closer. We'll find out a little bit tonight. But you're right. Consistent ball movement. Again, despite some high shooting percentages for Dayton, the overall defense, when you go to bottom line defense, how many the other teams scored, it's pretty good. The other thing is, this is a team that's got to win the rebound battle, and they didn't.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So part of defending is closing out a defensive stand by capturing the ball on the rebound. Too many offensive rebounds for Dayton, which negates all your good defense in that possession. So those are some of the details that have to be you'd have to be more thorough.
Let's talk about the defense, because obviously I think there's questions. There's questions not only with execution, but also just where the floor and ceiling is for the St. Louis defense. Because I want to criticize it, but at the same time, Travis brought this up at practice. It's hard to criticize the St. Louis defense at times when they only allow 29 points to that Dayton squad, and 14 of those in the second half, and 14 of those 29 come at the foul line. And honestly, I didn't think that all those fouls by St. Louis were that egregious. I thought a lot of them were kind of light, especially the ones in the paint. But nonetheless, you got to play with the game that's being called in front of you. So they're not a great defensive team, but I do think there is some bright spots. And the bright spot for me right now has been the defense on a string, the help defense. I think they've done a good job of being connected and covering for their man and things like that. Sometimes they get a little overzealous, but the egregiously bad, just missed assignments that I think we saw at times in December and January when we were seeing a little bit more zone defense, maybe some implementation. I think we're seeing less of that. And Travis didn't really agree with me when I asked if the fact that there's more it's better team defense, and that team defense is going to be how they win, not individual defense. Are we going to see more zone? Because that kind of maybe gives them a little bit more of that heavy help, hard hedge, maybe even blitzing or double teaming guys in certain situations. He said maybe not, but honestly, it still wouldn't surprise me if that's something we see kind of in there a little bit more, because it seems to be that's the one strength. If you're going to find one strength right now in the St. Louis team, it seems like they are a good help defense team.
And it's greatly improved. It started off pretty good, but after about a month into the season, I think it's maybe 6 weeks, it started to get really good. It seemed like the guys really started to get the concept and execute it. So I agree with you. The man-to-man help defense has been a real bright spot.
And then the other thing is going to be right out of the gate. I think it's funny we're talking about defense, because Davidson, as we get into tonight's matchup against the Wildcats, it's going to be interesting because they're one of the few teams that has taken advantage of one of my bigger issues with the defense, which is Jake and Francis don't step out onto bigs. They don't switch a lot, so bigs can get a lot of easy threes. Davidson's one of the few teams that's taken advantage of that in their matchups against the Billikens. It wasn't as stark as it could have been. Skogman took 2, Menenga took 7, and Reed Bailey took 4 and they hit 6 of those 14. So not terrible, not backbreaking, but just right out of the gate, we talk about that help defense. We talk about maybe playing more zone. A big man shooting over the top's one thing that can kind of really screw with you in that situation. So right out of the gate, just talking about better defense, it's going to be interesting to see if a big problem throughout the entire season and in the last game against Davidson, despite the win, it's interesting to see how that will be covered up tonight against the Wildcats.
I'm not sure I'm getting exactly what your concept is. Are you suggesting that the Billikens should play more zone against?
I think we're going to see it more over the next 6 games, and I think Davidson will be an interesting trial because a shooting big man has been such a big problem for them. It'll be interesting for me right off the bat if maybe that's something that's mitigated by the zone, or if it's something that even gets worse because they're playing in a zone. And honestly, I think because of their lack of switching the 1-5 pick and rolls, they refuse to switch that. And so I wonder if the just natural switching, mentality of their zone defense, if that leads to better switches and maybe closes out that part of Davidson's offensive game.
Well, I haven't seen him practice that much. So it would surprise me if they did it a lot. However, we are seeing more trap defense. Maybe that's the way that they'll address your question.
I'd like to see it because, again, it's clear at this point, even with good effort from guys like Javonte and Gibson, they can't shut down teams, one-on-one on the perimeter. And so it's going to have to come from team defense. Both Gibson and Travis talked about that. And I have a feeling that
tonight they may do some of that zone, but I think maybe the only guy they'll trap will be Foster Lawyer, who's a terrific player. And I don't think they'll trap the other guys because they don't want to be a man short against Menenga or Lawyer. But I do think we could see some sideline traps against Lawyer. That's a guess.
I'd like to see that because unlike the offense, which I think we both agree that if you take the 24 minutes of good offense we see and extrapolate it to 40, we're pretty happy if it's just that 24 all over again. But the defense, I think we agree there has to be an improvement if St. Louis is going to be, if they're going to consistently be able to win games in the low to mid 80s instead of having to play games in the low to mid 70s, excuse me. If they continue to win games in the low to mid 70s instead of playing in the 80s, if the offense isn't going to get them to the 80s and they got to win games in the 70s, can the defense get them there? That's my big question over these next 6 games. I just need to see more consistency from the offense, but I just need to see a higher floor from the defense, bottom line. And whether or not that comes from more zone or something along those lines, they have to figure out the issues with the fact that they can't play teams one-on-one, and they have to come up with some kind of cohesive, some of their parts defense on the other end.
I hear everything you're saying. I think they have to execute the defensive game. I think it's more about execution than scheme.
Okay. Interesting. I think that might just be the quick point rammer pregame. Just St. Louis Billikens, both offensive and defensively, execution over scheme.
I kind of believe that in very general terms. But yeah, ball movement and making shots. Move the ball all day long, but if you miss all your shots, it doesn't do much. But I think if they move the ball properly, they will get the shots. And I think if they retain the defensive game plan and execute it, I think it can be a decent team defense. Losing Fred Thatch hurt a lot. And when you look at the group, you don't see, that guy's a lockdown defender. Coro's pretty good if he doesn't foul, and Yuri's pretty good. Excuse me. And Yuri's pretty good. Actually very good. But straight line drives to the basket have been a problem. You mentioned a couple of others. but the defensive execution, I think, will be critical.
All right, so we talked about the offensive execution, the defensive execution, looking at not just tonight, Rammer, but across these next 6 games, as we talk about the Billikens being their best team once they get to Brooklyn for the A-10 Conference Tournament. What do you have to see from this team tonight and over these next 6 games?
Well, when you look at 6 games, and this is to approach it from a loser's mentality, guilty. So for all of our viewers, yeah, you're a loser. Okay, I accept. But if you want to approach it, what's the worst you can do and get in the top 4? Now, if you don't get in the top 4, it's not a death knell. When the Bills won the tournament in 2019, they won 4-4. But every coach, I talked to Travis about this the other night. He goes, yeah, you don't have to, but he goes, there's not a coach who wants to play have to get one less win to win the deal, right?
Absolutely not.
So being in the top 4, we would say, I think critical is good, but it's not, it doesn't end all discussion. But it sure is something you really desire. So what's the worst you can do to get that? So I'm kind of reverse engineering from the loser mentality.
Right.
Will 3-3 get you there? Gosh, I don't know, Rocc. Maybe not.
I don't think so.
What about 4-2? I think 4-2 probably does. So if you're saying what's it going to take, I think it's going to take 4-2. Now, if you're saying in general terms, what's it going to take to play better? Well, I think we talked about all those things.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, you got to play at Richmond, and you got to play at VCU. Holy cow! No, thank you. And you got Dayton at home.
Yeah.
Now you beat Dayton at home. It's a good rivalry. They've been on a strong streak against SLU, really since Miller had them going in those 4 NCAA tournaments in a row. 8 years ago? The Flyers have had a nice run. So those are really 3 really tough games, right? So that tells you got to win your other home games to give you a chance, and either beat one of the 2 Richmonds on the road, or absolutely beat Dayton at home, or let's approach it from the positive. Are any of those games you can't compete? You're just going to phone in and say, hey, we're not showing up? I don't think so. They're all winnable. Every one of them is winnable. So, yeah, now, you never won at VCU either, so maybe you say, okay, maybe not. You want to take that one away from me because of history?
I might have to.
Okay, so you're 5-1. Heck, you could finish in first. But that shows you how tight it is from 5-1 to 3-3, going 1 through 5 in the standings. That's how tight it is.
And it's going to be a tough one. And they can start right off with a win against Davidson tonight. You're going to be able to hear Bob Ramsey on the call over on KMOX with our good friend Earl Austin Jr. Rammer, thank you so much for joining me today. That's all we got today on Two-Man Game on Claibs Online. Rammer, you have a great day. Have a great game tonight. I'll talk to you later, and we'll bring home a winner for the Billikens.
Well, it's like it's McKay, the old coach at Tampa Bay, once said when they asked him about, well, how's your team execution? He says, I'm for it, of course. So execution is the key the rest of the way. See you, buddy.
There you go. Talk to you later, Rammer. You have a good one.
From our roots in St. Louis, Royal Banks of Missouri is branching out to continue serving you with our locations in St. Charles, Jerseyville, Granite City, and now in Hannibal, Center, and New London. Royal Banks of Missouri, the community bank in your community.